Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, your home for heavy strategy, awesome theme, and everything in between. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 120, Designer Roundtable on Games with Non-Traditional Themes, Part 1. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy New Year, everybody. This is 2019. I hope that your New Year's went amazingly well and that you are off to a great start with your New Year's. ENGN is off to a fantastic start in 2019. Our first episode, I am really excited. It is another designer roundtable. So we've done 2 of these so far. I've had fun every single time. I hope you guys have had fun as well. This time, I have gathered some folks who have made some games with non-traditional themes. So I was kind of reflecting on some of the things that I want for 2019. I'm like, I want something different. I want new. I want, not the same old Cthulhu, not the same old thing, fantasy dungeon crawler or whatever it is. So I figured, why not? Let me just reach out to some folks who are making different games and actually doing it, walking the walk, talking the talk, all that good stuff. So I have 3 tremendous designers, new designers on the scene right now. I'd like to introduce them right now. The first person I have here is Elizabeth Hargrave. She is the designer of Tussie Mussie, winner of the 2018 Button Shy Gen Can contest, as well as the designer of Wingspan, currently on pre-order from Stonemeyer Games. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason.
Am I calling you Elizabeth or Liz? I always forget.
I stick with Elizabeth.
All right.
I don't know how I managed to stick with a long name my whole life, but here I am. I don't look up when people say Liz.
You've managed to train people and be like, all right, Liz is not happening. We're going with Elizabeth. This is great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us. So up next, we have Sarah Reed. She is the co-designer, along with her husband, Will, of games like Project Dreamscape, as well as Oaxaca, Crass of a Culture. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks for having me on.
Last and certainly not least, we have R. Eric Royce, the designer of a game that needs no introduction to our audience. It won the Advanced Strategy Game, or our Advanced Strategy Game Award for 2017. Kickstarter made over hundreds of thousands of dollars. The designer of Spirit Island, R. Eric Royce, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
All right, so all 3 of you have made games with non-traditional themes. You've all kind of gone against the grain, given us, something new, something different, something fresh. And I wanted to kind of pick your brains and talk about some of that process and talk about, bringing that stuff from concept to table, so to speak. I just stole that from Low Player Count, guys. I'm a big fan of Travis. There you go. I'm going to shout you out over there. Okay, so how we're going to do this is most of the questions that I got are from the people around BGG, Facebook. So a lot of these questions come from you. So people who participated in the threads, hit me up in private, through Twitter and all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for the interesting questions. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to get into the designer's particular games in a little bit. I would like to ask a couple of broad, open-ended questions first so that all of the designers can participate. And Aaron, BGG user Spaceman, asked a really good question that I think I had in mind when I first started to kind of, think about this whole games with non-traditional theme things. He says, are the themes in your games simply ideas or themes that you liked? Or is there a part of you that actively wants to challenge the board game status quo when you design your games? So when you guys approach games, do you take a look and say, I'm tired of Cthulhu, I'm tired of zombies and whatever it is, I want to design something different? Or does it come from your passion, or is it a little bit of a mix of both? So
I'd say for me it was both. But okay. So when I first started Wingspan years ago, it literally came out of a conversation with some friends of mine about why are there no games about something that we actually want to be spending our time on. So a lot of the friends that I play games with are also big outdoorsy people. as I am. And so we literally had a conversation one night. I'm like, why is this all castles and spaceships and but like, why are there no games about nature? Which has changed in the last few years. I would say there have been a bunch of really great, more nature-y games that have come out. But that was literally the inspiration for Wingspan when I first started working on it.
So that was like,
and then the bird theme is something that I legitimately am into in real life.
So, I mean, you really looked at the landscape and went, man, I want a game about X. You know?
Right. The game that I wanted did not exist, so I decided I had to make it.
All right.
Nice.
Same thing, Eric?
For me, it really depends on the game. Spirit Island was definitely made in reaction to the current sort of huge raft of Euros out there, which are sort of the colonial point of view, but then other games I make are either, like Elizabeth said, you know, a game I want to play, but it doesn't exist, maybe thematically, but maybe mechanically, or are come out of an idea of a moment of play, which I want to see, and from there I kind of explore into mechanics and theme. So it, I guess, sort of sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay. How about you, Sarah?
I would say it's kind of a mix for us too. Oaxaca is an interesting one because it was definitely about having something real world. I know you don't want us to get too much into the game specifically, but the original theme was actually archaeology, but Will wanted it to be real world, not abstracted. And so that's one of the things that we were trying to go for, and it wasn't working. And that's why we ended up going with Oaxaca, which was much more approachable and accessible, both in terms of art and understanding and things like that. And then Project Dreamscape, that one came a bit more mechanical first. And we thought, well, what's something everybody does? Everybody dreams. So, because everyone has to sleep. Well, not everyone dreams, but everyone sleeps. So we thought of dreaming worked well with the mechanisms we got there. But other ones, like one I just designed for the AEG call for women designers, I stopped and just thought, what do I want to see more in the world? And at that point, there was a lot of negativity. And so I was like, I want there to be more positivity. And so I designed a game about warm and fuzzy feelings because that's what I wanted to see more. So it is a bit of a mix depending on whether it's mechanisms first or theme, but it's definitely about trying to find new areas to grow into.
I'm noticing a theme of like dialogue with the larger culture, dialogue with the larger world, which I don't know if every game designer would say that, you know. So maybe that's kind of a thing that's a train when they do non-traditional stuff. You know, I mean, I'd imagine like you know, or like a Vital Lacerda is like, okay, I need a game about museums or or wine or something, or I don't know, like I don't know how to kind of say that, but like, you know, not every designer is going to sit there and say the game space needs X. This game does not exist yet. So it's really interesting that all three of you have kind of like are engaged with this kind of larger conversation, and that's where your very interesting games come from. All right, so I'm going to follow that up with a question from Lines Hutter. He is of the Automa Factory. He works with Morten Monrad Pedersen, who we'll hear from in a little bit. So Lines asks, and I laughed when I heard Lines' question because I kind of heard a little bit of the exasperation behind it. He says, why do you think designers still design games with overused themes like generic fantasy, zombies, trading cubes for other cubes? Do they have the feeling the world needs more games with these themes, or do publishers specifically ask for it? So I laugh because, like, you know, do they think the world needs more games with generic fantasy? It's like, I can only imagine designers like, okay, we need another game with generic fantasy. Let's make it happen. The world is just calling out for it. But what Lines kind of gets at is that it's not just like people that want to make these games, that there's publisher kind of push to make some of these games happen. So I was wondering if you, as independent game designers, had encountered that in your interaction with publishers.
Well, I think it's more that those common themes are common because a lot of people like them. And therefore, if you want to make a popular game, which is a different metric than good or mechanically strong or whatever it is, but if you want to make a popular game, one of the easiest ways to do that is to pick a common theme that people don't have to think hard about. It's like those who love zombies, slap zombies on it, they're going to see zombies like, oh, I might probably like that because I like zombies. I mean, one of the things when I try to get new gamers into the hobby, I ask them, what kind of things do you like? And I tend to start with games that are thematically of interest to them. And then we can start going into other avenues once they're more comfortable as gamers.
Mm-hmm. You said yes there to some of that, Eric?
Oh, yeah, just absolutely. My first game, Fealty, is a very generic fantasy theme. And I kind of agonized over that for a little while, and I tried looking for a retheme. I'd originally developed it that way because its initial conception sort of sprang out of chess, and so I sort of inherited the theme there. And so I tried a bunch of different rethemes, and I kind of found one which sort of worked, involving like street protesters. But
that would have been awesome. There are no street protester games.
It would have been neat, but it didn't fit the mechanics quite right. And it ended up the board, as it would have needed to be for city blocks instead of a countryside, became very busy and hard to parse. And I was looking at this, and then somebody said, there's a lot of fantasy games for a reason, and it's because a lot of people like fantasy games. Like, if you can't find another theme, don't agonize over it. Just go with the one which fits. So, I think that's part of it. I think you see that with cube pushing too, and economic games. Like, there's some themes which just sort of, the types of thematic activities you do lend themselves well to mapping to game mechanisms, so it's kind of easy to go there. Because one of the purposes of a theme in the game, like, part of it is immersion, but part of it is also to help players sort of keep a mental handle on all the moving pieces of the game. It's way easier to remember, I can trade in 2 grapes for 1 wine than it is I can trade in 2 of resource X for 1 of resource Q. Because there's the thematic binding there. And so, sometimes if you have, like, I'm turning things into other things, well, there's lots of alchemy games for a reason. So I've never, but to address the second part of the question, I don't think I've ever had a publisher specifically request a more sort of popular / often used theme, and every time I've seen a publisher observe a less used theme, they have nearly always been enthusiastic about it. They've always been like, ooh, this is different, this is interesting.
Maybe we've reached a point in the hobby where, like, there's so much glut of stuff. Maybe, like, 5-10 years ago when the market wasn't as saturated, it's like, okay, give me, like the new, or a thing that I know is going to be kind of solid and centrist. But now it's like there's a desperation to kind of stand out, that people are willing to take a little bit more risk with the themes. Is that kind of accurate?
Might be. Not sure. Have to ask a publisher.
There are no publishers on this call. What about you, Elizabeth? Have you had that pushback?
Sorry?
Have you had that kind of pushback from publishers about theming when you've talked to them?
No, I haven't. When I pitched Wingspan, I specifically looked for publishers that I thought would be open to it, that already had done some games that were sort of outside the mainstream set of themes. So I'm not sure I got a great sample there in terms of what anyone that was doing 100% fantasy stuff, I just didn't bother.
Fantasy Flight, I'm okay.
But I've also always wondered, to the extent that we say, like, these themes are popular, which they are. Also, if a lot of designers are, heavily into the hobby and spending all of their time playing the existing games, which are all about these existing themes, it's presumably because they are also people who like those themes, or
right.
Who have been so immersed in those themes that they are things that come naturally to them as well. So it's sort of a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah,
bit.
It's very true. If you like a certain thing, why not theme it what you're going to enjoy? If you can't think of something else, if you like fantasy, you like zombies, whatever, that makes the play testing and the design process much easier.
Mm-hmm. Like Lyons was saying, apparently there's designers that think that they could use more zombies. Why not? If you enjoy it, then why not? Okay, so dovetailing off of that, Val, BGG user Space Alien, kind of has a similar, like a question along those lines, where he asks, if a publisher asked you to retheme a game to zombies or Cthulhu or something like that, what would your reaction be? So I know Eric mentioned that they that you haven't had a publisher specifically ask for it. In fact, there seems to be energy on the other side. But kind of play the what if game. I'll ask Eric first since you brought it up. What if a designer had said, okay, Spirit Island, I like what you're doing here, but let's flip that around and let's make it a little bit more, kind of centrist. How would your reaction be?
Depends. Again, it sort of depends on the game. For Spirit Island, the answer would have been, nope, sorry, find another publisher. For some games, maybe. It's the zombies and Cthulhu are not really my usual wheelhouse, but if the game was one where I felt like it could reasonably go in that direction and feel right, then I might consider it. I have had a publisher suggest rethemes for games for me, but it's always actually been towards something less traditional. And in one case, it was I don't want to give details because it's still in the middle of possibly happening, possibly not. But it started off as fairly traditional, and the publisher suggested, I don't want to scare you off, but would you consider a theme about this totally random, bizarre thing? And I looked at him, I was like, let me think about that. And it took me about a day to really process, would this be okay? It's kind of niche, but so maybe. But the more, I guess, I'd be more inclined to think okay, going to generic fantasy, fine. Going specifically to Cthulhu or Pirates versus Zombies or whatever, less so.
What about you, Sarah? If you were, I know that you've had a more of a kind of an independent feel, but if you wanted to kind of move into the mainstream a little bit and the designer said, I love this game, this is a really cool engine, can we throw some, Trading the Mediterranean on this worker placement? Then how would you react?
Yeah, it really depends. And it is actually something that we're going to be going into the pitching to publishers route, because our partner Ben is having to take a step back because he's got 2 little girls and his family life's crazy, so he can't be our business partner anymore. So this is something we have to think about, and we've talked to a few publishers in the past about different games, and there was actually one that we had that was a bit too off. It was about necromancers, but you're talking 6 or 7 years ago, and at that time, they were like, this is a bit too specific and too out there. So they were talking about doing a more, not zombies or anything like that, but they just said, can you think of something else? And we reworked it actually into crime bosses. That doesn't make any sense right now without knowing the context of the game. But let me just say it worked for the mechanisms, because the mechanisms, it was a take that game. You were being mean to each other. So necromancers are mean to each other. That worked, but was a bit too niche. And then with crime bosses, same thing. You're fighting over territory. You're being mean to each other. And then actually once we made that switch, even our play testers were enjoying the game more because they could, again, it goes back to the previous question, they could relate a bit better to all the movies they've seen. They've seen a lot of crime bosses and dramas and shows like that, but not so much about necromancers. So I would always be open to it. There would be certain things that I would have to definitely, Eric said, take some time to really think about it. But if this is something that I believe in the publisher and I believe in the game, then it would be something I would want to explore to see if it's still possible to publish with this publisher.
Yeah, so some games, the theme is tied to the mechanisms. It's not changing. But some games, the mechanisms are kind of so rich and you just believe in them so much that you'd be a little bit more flexible. Is that kind of a fair way to put that? Yeah.
In other words, that either we're not tied to the current theme or we believe so much that the game needs to exist. As much as anything needs to exist, but that we want it to exist. And so, yes, we would be open to exploring alternative themes, even if they were very generic and mainstream.
What if they turned Wingspan? What if a publisher said, okay, we love Wingspan, but let's make this B-52 airplanes, or let's make this spaceships. How would that go for you, Elizabeth?
Yeah, no. Yeah, with Wingspan, I can't imagine being able to paste another theme onto it. I have another game that I just submitted to the same AEG call for submissions that Sarah mentioned. It's about monarch butterfly migration. And there also, I'm just the whole point is that process and that theme. But something like Tussie Mussy, that's like this simple 18 card game, which happens to be about Victorian flower language, which is also a very random theme. Like that, I'm not. Although the design came partly out of the concept of giving people flowers, I'm not as like it. It's not as complex a game and not as wedded to that theme in the same way that some of my other games are, where I'm so theme first, and all of the mechanics come out of my conception of how that theme could play out in a game. Like for many of the things that I have worked on, it's really hard for me to imagine how retheming would make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if someone had an idea, I'd always listen to it, but it's hard to
but then you'd politely say no. It's funny because you were on the episode where we were with Jason Tagmeyer and a bunch of the other Gen Can people, and it was right at the end of that call where we were talking about, okay, what's next? And you were like, I have a game about foxes, and I have a game about monarchs, and I'm
right.
like, that's actually what was the inspiration for this episode, because it stuck with me. And it's like, how many other designers would have said that? Not a lot of other designers. So that was actually pretty cool. It got my kind of my thoughts going, and then eventually led to this designer roundtable. So thank you guys.
Awesome.
So let's actually, I think it was Sarah mentioned theme and mechanisms. It leads into the next question, which is from Hans Gruberstein, who's a friend of mine. Hans Solo, he has his own YouTube channel. And also another BGG user, Through the Looking Glass, had a kind of similar question, so I kind of smushed them together. What are some instances where your unique theme affected the mechanisms or the basic game construction? So I think of like Oaxaca, which is, I don't think I've ever seen a game about Mexican crafts. Was there something about Oaxaca, the crafting culture there, that inspired a mechanism or something like that?
Actually, no, not with Oaxaca, because it was archaeology before, and so how it translated so seamlessly was in the archaeology is you'd go to the ruins, and there'd be different ruins, and you would find different types of artifacts. You'd bring them back to your study, you'd research them, and then you'd put them in your gallery for display. Change that to Oaxaca, you're going out into the wilderness to get raw materials to make different types of crafts. You bring them back to your workshop, you make the craft, and then you put it in your market stall. So that was one where the theme transition was seamless. We did add the tourist cards after we rethemed it as Oaxaca. So that was the only thing that was Oaxaca specific in terms of mechanisms and gameplay. And then there's some tweaks along the way. But like Warm and Fuzzy Feelings, that one was all about what do I feel is the concept that I want to get across of people are being, well, generally grumpy and generally unhappy. And so how do we change that? Well, you smile. I mean, the whole thing of giving someone a high five or a hug, these different things that we do to interact with each other to lift our spirits. And then they get warm and fuzzy feelings, which makes them more productive and allows them to do more things. Because when we're generally feeling better, we can generally accomplish more in our lives. And so there, the theme really drove the mechanisms. And that's where I got the idea of the resources of happiness, your hugs, your high fives, kisses and smiles. And then the cards are double-sided, and there's the grumpy side that has, each grumpy has a different amount of those resources that it needs to turn into the warm and fuzzy side. And then on the warm and fuzzy side, it has an ability that lets you get more resources. But the trick there is you don't keep the card that you change. You give it to somebody else. And we had some very interesting things with the playtesting because people are not used to not being able to directly affect their score. You have absolutely no ability to make your own score in this game. All the points are on the back side, the warm and fuzzy side of the card, and you're giving those to other people. So you indirectly affect other people, or you directly affect other people's scores, which then indirectly affects yours. So that part was definitely very interesting to see that there are times in life that we can't do a darn thing about ourselves, but we can help other people. And that's really what I was trying to get across with that. And that's where the theme really drove the mechanisms.
I'm a psychotherapist. You're speaking directly to my heart over there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sometimes you can't help yourself, but you can help other people. Glad you're able to find a mechanism that was able to kind of evoke that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Eric, I wanted to get back to you because the other thing that was hung in my head as you were talking was the whole the protester thing. And the barrier wasn't necessarily that, okay, how can I integrate this? How can I sell this or whatever? The barrier was the mechanism didn't work. So maybe talk a little bit about your experiences with themed mechanism and kind of marrying the two.
Let's see. I was thinking about Spirit Island, but for that particular case, it was the mechanics. Fealty is an influence game where you're spreading influence out from pieces, and in the context of a protest march, or it wasn't protest march, but protests and sort of winning over political influence in neighborhoods, sort of trying to win things. It never solidified. It never ended up working out. So I don't have a rock solid description of it.
Right. Well, you mentioned before Spirit Island, so you had a thing there.
Oh yeah, for Spirit Island, there were parts of it which were informed by theme, but the metaphysics of the spirits in Spirit Island was something that was not predetermined. So I could sort of feel free to develop those metaphysics alongside of the mechanics of the game and sort of pair them in ways which worked appropriately. But before even beginning with any of the mechanics, I sat down and did brainstorming and came up with 8 pages of I asked myself the question how would a spirit of myth or legend drive off people from its island, and just sat there and came up with a couple hundred different ways which it might do, angry bees, or drop them into large holes and fill the holes with water, or any other.
Look in the Bible, we have hundreds of them.
yeah, exactly.
Plagues, locusts,
and any fairy tales and all kinds of other things. And from those, I used that as the bedrock for some of the mechanical things in the game, wherever there was a lot of commonality between a bunch of things that spirits ought to be able to do. It's this probably needs a mechanic, so that I can represent all of these things using a set of cards. So there, the theme came very much first, and the mechanics literally grew out of them. Not just the specific ones, but sort of the underpinnings of the game. And
it was unique. There's not a lot of games where the land or spirits are kind of scaring people away. So it's not like you can kind of go back to this game. Oh, this game did it this way, so I can evoke that. You're kind of just drawing from scratch, so to speak.
Yep. Although, yeah, fear was actually not in the very first iterations. That came on. Spirit Island benefited from a very long development cycle. It had a lot of time to bake, and I had a lot of time to think about what would work well and try things, because I had my first kid 5 months after starting the game, which stretched everything out.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
I'm working on something right now. It's done. Not until my kid figures out how to sleep.
So there was a lot of try things thematically, figure out the mechanics, go back to the theme, use the theme to inform the mechanics again, sort of cyclical iteration over and over and over.
Cool. And Elizabeth, you say before you're a theme first designer. I imagine you have a billion instances where your meditations about the theme kind of inspired a certain mechanical direction in one of your games.
Yeah. So in Wingspan, most of the bird cards have a power that sort of contributes to your engine, and the example that was not always true. And one of the first birds that I came up with a specific power that was really inspired by an actual bird. There's a bird called a brown-headed cowbird that doesn't bother to build its own nest. It lays its eggs in other birds' nests.
Oh, and what a ninja! Oh,
yeah. No. Saves a lot of energy, turns out, because the other birds go out and when the eggs hatch, they feed the cowbirds for them. Wow. So in Wingspan, the way the final version of how that got implemented was that when other players take the action where they lay eggs, if you have the brown-headed cowbird, you get to lay an egg on one of your other birds, sort of mimicking the fact that when nesting is going on, the brown-headed cowbird is laying extra eggs in other birds' nests. But there's a lot of I tried where I could in Wingspan to come up with little powers like that sort of, a lot of them are a nod to something that the bird actually does.
Well, that's really awesome. I can't wait to play Wingspan. It sounds like an awesome game. Okay, so I'll move on to Morten Monrad Pedersen. He is from the Automa Factory. He asks, how do you sell a game with a theme that many will think is boring or uncool? So if you're Uwe Rosenberg, you can sell a game about quilting without breaking a sweat. But how do you do that if you're an unknown designer? Or does the fact that it's a unique theme kind of sell the game itself? So I think people are having a little bit of thoughts when it comes to that one. So whoever wants to jump on that.
Well,
I mean, I've been lucky enough with Wingspan not to have to worry about it so much because Jamie Stegmaier has such a well-oiled marketing machine.
Yeah, the game's already in Rodney's hands, and
it's been very interesting to see the response. There's a lot of people have already, even before pre-orders started, were on the Facebook group that he created for the game. And that's a self-selected group of people, right, that are interested in learning more. And he's been releasing information, and I've been posting stuff there about the development process. But it was really interesting of like the subset of people. There were plenty of people that were like, I know nothing about birds, but I trust Stonemaier to put out a good game, so yay. But there was this subset of people that are like, you have made my game. Birding and games are the two things in the world that I care about, and I love you, you know? And that would probably be true with any unusual theme that you could come up with. Like, there will be people that will love you for it. Intensely.
Trying to hit that niche.
That can go a long way.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was just, I don't know if it's a truism or not, but something I've heard is, and expressed, is that like it's way better to have a game which, 10% of people will love to death, 30% of people will be like, okay, that's fine, and like 60% of people will hate, than it is to have a game which everybody thinks is kind of okay. If you try and please absolutely everybody, then odds are pretty good that you'll end up not really making anyone super happy. But again, the niche themes, if you're trying to put it in the context of like a publisher pitch, I think what you would need to do is just demonstrate or show to the publisher that there are people who exist who will be really enthusiastic about this. And if you can convey that, then I don't think it would be much of an obstacle at all. Because I think I can't remember who mentioned, increased visibility in a fairly saturated market. I think that's something that's probably on many publishers' minds, and interesting themes can do that, so long as they can be reasonably sure that somebody will buy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it helps in terms of answering Morton's question to maybe point to a specific group or like a subreddit, or you open the Facebook page and you have all these people that you can actually point to that and say, okay, I don't know how this is going to do in the mass market, but these people are day one backers or day one pre-order people, that kind of thing.
Yep.
How about you, Sarah? How would you? Because I got to admit, I'm a Hispanic guy. And whenever something comes out, like, Teotihuacan was another game. Anything that comes out in like the Mesoamerican, Spanish American thing, I'm like, ooh, let me take a look. And Oaxaca definitely kind of takes that. Did you have that same reaction from the fans when it came to one of your games?
Well, Oaxaca definitely, because as you said, that reaches out to a certain part of people, because there are people, that's why we wanted to do the real world archaeology in the first place, is we wanted to connect it. So with Oaxaca, that was really easy, because there are people living in Oaxaca, people of Oaxacan heritage. For Will and Ben, that was part of their heritage. They're both Hispanic descent. So that was something that was close to them as well. I'm kind of the outsider on this. I'm very much just white American. I love it. Don't get me wrong. As soon as Ben, it was like, so the archaeology, because that's what he said. He helped us play test the original part of the archaeology game. And he's like, I really like your game. The theme is not doing it. can we do something else? And he actually had the idea of Oaxaca because he loves Oaxaca. He's been there. He loves, the culture and the art and everything. And so he had been trying to make a game about Oaxaca, and it wasn't working. So he pitched the idea of, hey, let's take your game mechanisms, which are working really well, and let's put Oaxaca on it. And that worked. But for other games, I don't know. I wouldn't say any of them. I mean, because the question was about dry, boring games. And I think the thing is, if you're passionate about it as a designer, people will see that. And hopefully that just enthusiasm. I mean, it's one of the things that I like to do is I like to post on Twitter what I'm doing, and I show people the process. I show where I'm like, I'm not sure what's going on, but this is the direction we're going, and people like to see that process. And so if you've got something unusual and weird, like once I started showing off Warm and Fuzzy Feelings, people are like, what's this bright, colorful thing? I'm not used to this thing that's bright, shiny, and smiling at me. And so it piques people's interest. So I think it's true about having the existing people that are already, people who love that kind of niche thing. But also as a designer, we have an opportunity, I feel, to reach out ahead of time before the game is even published, before, as you're working through it. If we can do that out in the public, because that's how I got inspired, is seeing other designers post publicly, hey, this is what I'm working on, is not being afraid that someone's going to steal it. Because if they try to steal it, well, they got a lot of work to do because it's not finished. So go right ahead. And if they're inspired by it, fantastic. If there's, something that they see, go for it. And this is how I've actually gotten some contact from publishers, is because I post publicly on Twitter. We were able to go to Origins, earlier this year, the first time we finally made it. And I really didn't want to overwhelm myself. I just scheduled a couple of publishers. But when I was there, I posted, hey, I'm at Origins. And one of my publisher friends like, you're at Origins? I want to see what you're doing. Just pitch me something. And so the fact was that he had been following me, and of course I was following him back. You can make these connections, and I think I'm losing my train of thought, but I think there's just a lot of opportunity with the internet that we can take really oddball stuff and just really run with it, and people are going to run with you too.
Yeah, no, that's nice. It's funny because, like, I guess I'm coming at it from, like, I'm a reviewer, and I get a lot of these kind of games from, like, the bigger companies, that will be blank, that shall remain nameless. And, like, okay, example, I have Australia here, the Martin Wallace game with a Z in there, and it's a neat little game, but it's Cthulhu.
Oh.
And it just, like, brought me to my knees. I'm like, oh my God, again. And it's funny because it's like, I guess if you look in the right places in the gaming sphere, then you're going to find some really, really great stuff. So I guess it's a question of, like, if you look at the game industry from one perspective, you're going to see the same old stuff. But if you look at it from a whole nother perspective, which I guess the three panelists here share, you're going to find a lot of oddball stuff, a lot of niche audiences, and a lot of passion. I guess I'm going to land there.
Yeah, I still feel that there is a separation of the larger publishers that get all their titles into all the game stores, and that's what the majority of people see. And then for, like, me, I mean, it's a 3-person team that we've been up to this point, and we're just running a Kickstarter. I'm just trying to do the social media, and we're just reaching the sphere that we're able to reach, which for Oaxaca, we had about a little less than 900 people. And we've only been slowly selling a few games here and there since we released it. So our impact on the board game community is really small. I've got passionate people that follow me, but on the whole, most people don't know I exist. So it really depends on where you're at. If you're backing Kickstarter, you're going to see more independent stuff. Also, people hate Kickstarter because they can get burned really easily if they don't, do their research. But on the other hand, you could go to the main store, pay $80 for a game, and be burned there too because you didn't do the research. And you just like, oh, I like this company, I should like this game. But that's not always the case. So,
well, we're trying to fix that outreach thing right here with you on the panel, so hopefully a couple of more people can hear of the stuff that you're doing. For this first part of the conversation, I will end with a question from Sarah Bear, who has contributed to our show before. Hi, Sarah. So she wants to know, what is the weirdest theme that you have thought of or heard of that has the weirdest prayer of becoming an actual game? So she was talking about making a game out of fiber arts, spinning, weaving, dyeing. She wants something that's, that actually actively does that a little bit more than the puzzle pieces of patchwork or something like that. So I guess I'll start with Eric. What do you think is the weirdest theme that you have ever thought of or encountered?
The weirdest theme?
Like the most oddball theme is like, whoa, a game like that would be sick.
The mention of fiber arts actually means two different things. There's one concept I'm working on right now, which would be very weird in presentation, unlike anything else. But the theme itself isn't that off the wall. If you go to somebody else and I have a concept notebook where I just throw ideas so that I don't need to remember them. So if you give me like 10 seconds, I can go look at that. Anybody else got an answer?
All right,
yeah,
Liz, save him.
That I keep on my phone.
Yeah.
well, are you asking for stuff that we've thought of, or stuff we would want to see, or kind of both?
I guess the weirdest theme that has a chance to actually be a board game.
Well, I know there's one that we've tinkered with off and on that I really hope we can figure out, but more because I love cooperative games, but those are like the hardest, well, for me anyways, the hardest thing to design, I think, is cooperative games. There's just so many things you have to balance. But one of the things that I absolutely love also is city building. And so we've been tinkering with an idea of how do you make a cooperative city builder, where as you actually build the city, you actually unlock, I mean, I guess it's a little Charterstone, but not Legacy, but that you would add, we don't even know if it's card-based or a board, but you would expand this city, and then that adds spaces that people could interact with each other in trying to build up this city together. And that's about as far as we've gotten, is that's two things I've never seen together: city building and cooperative play.
Okay. Elizabeth, have you had a chance to scroll through your phone?
Yeah, there's plenty of weird stuff in there. The weirdest thing that I'm actually working on, well, I've kind of shelved it for right now, but I'll probably pick it back up before Unpub, is there was this experiment that started, I think, in the 50s in Russia and is ongoing to this day, where a bunch of geneticists, or actually just a couple geneticists, decided to start trying to breed foxes into domesticated dogs so they could study sort of what the genetic process is of domestication. And there is a fascinating set of traits that started showing up super quickly that are all the things that we associate with what a domesticated dog looks and acts like barking and curly tails and floppy ears and all these things. And it took only I forget, 25 years or something.
Wow.
Which, hey, it's amazing that they had this experiment that ran for now 60-something years, but that it only took 25 to actually start getting results. Is also amazing. So anyway, so I have this game that is sort of working, but still needs quite a bit of work, based on that experiment, where you are breeding foxes and passing traits down until somebody gets an animal that has all domesticated traits.
Wow. I totally play that.
Did you find something, Eric?
Yeah, I found a bunch of stuff. I think so. I'll just take three. One is a game about tranquility and finding spiritual or psychological peace, where this is would be an objective, both your objective in the game, but also the game itself would hopefully allow you to find a certain measure of tranquility rather than being purely sort of mechanical. It's a concept I'm messing around with. It would be kind of an art piece game in some ways. The second is a very light sort of, light, quick game about combat dentistry, where you are combat dentists attempting to clean the teeth of various were-creatures, werewolves, were-lions, that kind of thing. They of course are somewhat dangerous to perform dentistry on. And the last is one which was an idea I had a while back back when, I don't know, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when sort of the Euro game and, Amera, whatever, genres were a little bit more distinct. I had an idea for a fusion game, which I called Smite, where you were building a cathedral, of course, because in Euros you're always building a cathedral. But it wasn't just any cathedral. It was in sort of a timeline. It was like the year 942, and you were coming up on the millennium. And as it turns out, like that's when the end of the world is going to happen. Dark things from the evil place are coming to envelop and destroy medieval Europe, or actually Dark Ages Europe. And you are building cathedrals which then turn into giant stone punk transformer humanoid robot-y things, with like choirs of monks singing and praying inside of them to power them and make them go, and like ropes and wooden gears all over the place, to go off and fight off these gigantic demons. So you'd have sort of your Euro phase where you build your cathedral, and then your sort of, Ameritrash phase where you go and punch face with your cathedral, going back and forth.
Wow.
Yeah, we're giving out free ideas, people.
Yep.
Somebody jump on one of these. It's funny because, Elizabeth, you mentioned like the Russian experiments. I don't know if you guys read about the Russian doping scheme from the Olympics.
No.
Like, because they got sanctioned
I'm aware
recently.
that in general they have been known to do it, but I don't know the specific scheme.
It is amazing. So, like, this was I think it was in Sochi, where every athlete has to get, the urine tested, and it's in these, like, what happens, they do the sample and they put it in these, like, these technologically advanced impregnable, vials, and with the, like, lock tops and everything. So it was this whole scheme where there'd be a doctor, and the doctor is, doing the regular things with the athletes. And then when everybody was, when everything was done, he would take all the samples down in there. He would put the vials, like, stick it in a little hole in his lab to a bunch of secret agents in the other side of the hole who would, like, crack the vial. So he'd put it open, they'd give the urine back, he'd, like, put coffee grinds and all sorts of other, like, kind of neutralizing agents into the stuff, and he'd give it back to the super spy agents who were on the other side of the wall. And, they would kind of put the top back. So hopefully, nobody would discover that these samples have been, like, altered. And it was like this was widespread, and it was done over a couple of weeks. And I can only imagine, like, a real-time game or some kind of bluffing game where it's like, okay, I have to sneak the vial of urine into the, the super secret agent over here. And I have to, like, manipulate the elements and this, hide all the steroids that they're taking.
Dang.
There's so many different things that you can do.
Yes. So literally, like, half of my list on my phone of game ideas is, like, links to articles like that, or, like, anything. Many of them are more nature-y because that's the stuff that I read and am immersed in. But yeah, like, the stuff is out there just waiting to be mined.
Mm-hmm.
And waiting to be made into a game. And I think that is the spirit of the episode. So that's going to do it for part one. Thank you so much. We're going to transition into a little bit more, direct conversation about the games, and also talk a little bit about more of the, political, cultural conversations we're having around these games in the second part. So I'm really excited to keep this going. So we are at almost an hour here. We're going to have another hour with these fine people. So this is me in the editing room. I'm just having a really big smile listening to this stuff. This is turning out to be one of my favorite couple of episodes that we've done so far here at ENGN. So really excited for you to stay tuned to listen to the next part. If you have any reactions to what you've heard here, you can reach out to us, ENGN_podcast on the Twitter. Every Night is Game Night Facebook group. EveryNightIsGameNight.com is our main website. We have a geek list where we maintain a lot of the episodes. I love to interact with you guys, especially about this stuff. Was there particular things about the weird themes or theme and mechanisms or how weird themes kind of fit into the larger gaming sphere? Open up that conversation, reiterating that Wingspan is on pre-order right now. I'm pretty excited about that project, so go ahead and take a look at that one. That will be it for this week. Please stay tuned for next week. Another big chunk of time with these three great designers. As Anthony would say at the end of every episode, go ahead and grab a solo game off of that shelf and let's make every night a game night.